The first reading.
We need
That's it.
to change the view back. Otherwise, everybody's just going to see us sitting in the audience.
Hey, Trent. Did you send the Zoom link to the other observatories?
Should be. Well, I mean, I sent it to EAO and then I copied over to Hilo seminars list.
Okay.
And because the whole Google invite should be in those.
Yeah.
I can tell you're going to be out of the frame.
Oh, that's okay. I don't need to be in any frames. I can be frame free.
No.
It's okay, our camera moves.
Oh, good.
And also, we're going to get rid of that thingy.
No.
Content only. See,
Thank you. That's
that
better.
drives me crazy when when we don't do that, because I don't think everybody knows how to do it on this thing.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it.
I mean, it's so distracting. I find it really distracting.
No, I
Watch
don't need to.
The infinity.
Yeah.
Recursive,
See my works when you have audio feedback on it. Oh. Hey, how you doing?
And I should do a phone announcement.
Okay. Did I see that yet? I'm sorry if I don't remember, but it's good.
Yeah, the other day.
Okay, sorry, I didn't have a chance to say it. That's all.
We almost matched.
Yes. Oh, yeah, except mine now, the grades are coming through, so I have to redo it again.
Do you know there's like black colored conditioning and stuff?
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that you don't have to do hair dye.
That sounds desperately dangerous. I end up like shampoo dyeing the rest of my bathroom, and my hair. But I'll check that out.
Uh-oh.
I mean, you probably don't.
What's that? What do you need?
I don't see them.
I see the left in my office.
Trent lost his glasses. Interesting the demographics in the room.
What are you reading? What did you put?
I don't know. Where did they gone?
What are you looking for?
My glasses.
You mean
oh,
these?
they're right there. Okay.
Because you weren't wearing your glasses.
I hate it when you post your glasses because you don't have your glasses on.
Okay. Oh no, it's not even too. Okay, now we can. And is the back door still propped open?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Wait.
Just turned
Oh, that's
3.
Hmm?
Just turned 3.
Okay. Good.
No,
Yeah. I get spooked by that camera, but I think it just turned itself off.
Bye.
Good, very good. It's a good thing.
Is there no? Oh, there. No. Sorry, we're at the end. The Gemini people. The list of.
Oh, sorry. I'm pretty sure everyone's in the website.
They're there. We see them.
Yes.
Chris and Jen.
Excellent. All right. I guess we can go ahead and get started. Many of you probably know Jessica. She is Deputy Director at JCMT, just next door. And during this year's IFA Equinox thing, every director gives a little ditty about what's going on. And Jessica made this very interesting announcement about achieving equity at EAO within 3 years, I think it is. I don't know results. And said that you should invite her to come give a talk at your institution. So I did that.
Yes, make sure.
She's here.
Like a man who follows instructions.
So, Nash will give us a talk.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. So I've been doing a tour, trying to do a tour around the observatories to report on the fabulous participation and support you all gave for the equity survey that we did last year. And so this is a distillation of the sort of pertinent things in the report. I'll also link to the report at the end. This is a work in progress. So I would love it for you to stop me at any point. I don't want to leave questions to the end. Very, very happy to have a conversation anytime through this because I'm really interested in how useful this is for you, and particularly because I have now great respect for social scientists after doing this. And so, you know, in this particular field, I'm an amateur. So how we're presenting this, what is effective, what is useful going forward is the thing I'm most intrigued about. And so, as I said, anytime you want to chat about anything on the screen or anything else that comes to mind, please just stop me. But I'd love to have a chat at the end as well. So, why did we do a survey? So we had, if you'll recall, we had our Women of Maunakea event last year in 2018. And this was just to start a conversation about the community of women scientists here at the Maunakea Observatories. And one of the things that came up was that there was no survey that had been conducted across the observatories as a whole. And so really just to continue the conversation in a framed way, we need data, we need the weight of opinion, we need to structure the conversation going forward. That was really the initiative for the survey. So we want data, we want to establish a baseline demographic. We want to investigate workplace cultures. Of course, there's a lot of differences there, but where are the similarities? Let's have that conversation. And then invite opinion around the observatories about the existence, if any, awareness and importance of gender equity and other kind of equity initiatives. These were really the intent of the survey as we went into it. So, why does gender equity and diversity matter? It has been shown multiple very, very interesting assessments and tests and experiments to show gender balance and diverse teams get better results. Organizations with gender balance, diverse ethnic, age, and other sort of upbringing related events mean that you have an effective creative team. They achieve higher completion, they do it cheaper, they do it faster, and it's also self-sustaining after a point. Retention, morale, all of these things have been shown to be better when you have and you achieve this kind of diversity and equity. STEM fields are not currently achieving gender equity. You probably all know this. I'm pretty sure this is not a surprise to anyone in the room, particularly when we go into senior and management roles. Again, probably not a surprise. There have been some improvements, but not in all fields. And then the other thing which has been shown is equity cannot be achieved organically. We need equity and diversity programs. It has been shown to accelerate the hiring of women. This was a very interesting study which from Holtzman et al. 2018. This is every single field that they looked at, where if the current rate of acquisition of women in the field continued without change, this is how long it would take in hundreds of years to achieve equity. Oh. And so you come down here. Not doing that great. It was really, really depressing. This was an amazing thing to see here. And there's an asterisk, by the way, here on nursing, because this is the only one which is flipped. Okay. So at the current rate, this is how long it's going to take us to get as many men into nursing, 300 odd years. So it's a very interesting study. This is where we're going to be if we don't do more. So we did 63 questions, Survey Monkey. If you participated, you were familiar with this. We tried to keep it so that it was 15 minutes or less to complete. The themes were demographics, workplace culture, advancement, mentoring, workplace treatment, and opinions on diversity initiatives. We wanted participation to be voluntary. We wanted it to be anonymous. And people had the choice not to answer questions if they were too sensitive. We had dichotomous questions and Likert scale questions for the opinion sections. The key reporting decisions, which are important, we present all of the results in aggregate. This was mainly for the concern from people that they would be identified with the smaller observatories. And also the point of this was not to compare observatories, was not to shame one observatory in particular. We decided that that was not useful, and so that's why all of these numbers are in total. Yes, we know there are big differences in the culture on the workplaces, but I still think there's some effective results in here. Individual opinions were solicited so people could write in comments. We do not bring those up in the report, again, with the concerns for identification. No salary information. We did ask about it. We didn't get quite enough demographics on being able to look at gender pay gaps. None of those numbers are brought up here. And if you're wondering when I say statistic is significant, I do mean that. That's by a t-test, 95% confidence level. Okay, so let's get going. We'll start with some numbers. We had an amazing response rate. I was so impressed by this. So we had nearly 360 respondents, nearly 70%. This means we really could get our teeth into some numbers. 32% of the survey respondents were women. This was really good because this actually reflects the 32% of women that are currently employed at the Maunakea observatories. If you just look at the science fields, science and engineering fields, 31% of our Maunakea observatory staff are women. This is comparison to 25% of AAS and the frankly woeful 16% at the IAU level. So if we're talking comparisons, yes, we're doing better than some of these organizations, arguably, though this number is still low. Now, that was just scientists. When you take in engineers, this number drops down further. So this is including engineering and technical fields. Now we're down to 21%. That is lower than the national average of 24% in the STEM fields. Are we reflecting the demographics in Hawaii? And are we reflecting the demographics in the US? So the dark blue here is the Maunakea observatories, the pink is Hawaii State, and then you have the US totals here. These are some interesting numbers. I don't think you'd be too surprised by these. We are definitely making up our white component, and of course we do have a larger proportion of Asian employees, as you might expect in the state. So these are sort of the takeaways. Above the US in our Asian employees, but below the state average. And 6% identify as ethnic Hawaiian. All right, so let's break it down now by age. This is what it looks like as you go through age groups in our observatories, men to women split. So we continue here with dark blue as women and the light blue as men. We do better in our younger age groups. What's interesting is when you just go into the STEM fields, the age distribution gets really extreme. So the AAS did a look at this as well. And in the AAS survey, they said 40% were women under 43. So I put those here and shaded in red so you can see the comparison with the Maunakea observatories. And this is the number we're going to come back to here, this 36 to 45-year-old age group. And why are we doing so poorly in representation right there? So, okay, this little one here takes a little bit of time to unpack, so bear with me. This is the demarcation line. This is percentage to 100 women, men. This pink bar in the middle is that if in a particular field where gender equity, it'll fit in this pink bar. So the further it is one way or the other is the more gender imbalanced that particular area is. And I've actually broken it down here specifically into ethnic minority as well, because it's quite interesting. So you can see here, this is where we really hit it. These technical fields, these management fields, we are very much more imbalanced towards men, and maybe unsurprisingly, you see the opposite being the case in the administrative fields. Any questions about that one?
Can you say what the colors are?
Yes, sorry, that is not easy to see on here. Red, Caucasian women, Asian women, minority women of color, Caucasian men, perhaps not a surprise, Asian men and minority men of color.
I guess the question with that is, when has there been turnover in the administrations? So obviously you can read that all the management is probably, it's well out of balance. But how long, if you look at how long those people have hired, right? Those transitions, even if you look at Harvard, they only reach 50% in their admissions for students like this year or last year in terms of 50-50 balance. So I'm just wondering if we can look, if you looked at the average for how the lifetime of someone at an observatory management, how long are they there?
We'll talk about retention.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to retention because there's another couple of interesting notes there. Okay. I don't know why. Okay, so here's, we've actually just come to it straight away. We asked how long people have been in their positions. There's a statistically significant difference in retention of men and women at Maunakea observatories. This bottom is simply just the amount of men and women, dark blue women, light blue men who've been here less than 1 year, 2 years, 5, 10, 20, and greater than 20 years. So this is the percentage. And so the thing here, 71% of the women at Maunakea observatories have been in their role less than 5 years. Okay, so there's a huge difference in this number here. You see this increase in for men in all of these roles, but you see this huge drop off here. There's a couple of reasons that could be, which we can talk about. This is the second one, which I want to talk about in tandem. We asked if people had caring responsibilities. We didn't say what that could be, whether it was a child, parent, partner. 41% of women have caring responsibilities compared to 59% of men. And so now we break it up here by ethnic designation as well. And if you talk about the women who are in STEM fields, this becomes even more extreme. Just 34% of the women in STEM roles also have caring responsibilities compared to 60% of the men. So you take this into consideration with the previous one about retention of women who are in childbearing years, and you can go to a conclusion, potentially, that one of the reasons is that as women are having children, they are not capable of maintaining their positions at a Maunakea observatory with the same amount of ease as a man who is going into having a family. Switching just a little bit, we can come back to that at any time, by the way. Have a think about it and we'll get to it. 22% of staff attended school in Hawaii. 51% of Maunakea survey participants were resident in Hawaii when they were hired in their current position. So that was an interesting one, I thought. Now this is interesting. We asked if you'd done high school in Hawaii. So what I've broken down here is the roles for staff. The top is if they were at high school in Hawaii versus high school out of state. This sort of leads to questions about types of roles, which people who are either or defining themselves as local, locally born, locally educated, versus those who are not. And the interesting demographic shift there, of course, is in our science positions in particular. 38% of administrative staff are local or locally educated. 51% of Maunakea technicians did their schooling in Hawaii, but just 12% of management staff were educated in Hawaii. Okay, here we get into the ones that scare all the managers in the room. I like this. We asked how happy people were. So 83% of people are pretty happy. We've got a pretty happy lot, and I think that's not something that's too surprising to anybody. 57% are pleased with their senior management. You could turn that around and say then that there's 43% that are not.
Come on.
We're here to be honest. Come on, Andy. 44% are happy with their opportunities for advancement. That's less than half. This is something which is very interesting to me. We overwork our staff. 94% say they work longer than their contracted hours in some way, shape, or form. Over 50% say they do it a lot. This makes you feel a bit better though. We asked what's the greatest pleasure you get from working. Most people saying it's challenging work, it gives me a sense of accomplishment. What I put here, though, and this is something I want to take you to think about, especially for your management, there are different order for the women than they are for men, right? The reasons people come to work are different, and there are gender differences in that, and they're things that are worth considering. Being respected and valued for women is far more important for a large proportion. That is definitely something worth taking to heart. It does mean that they feel respected and valued in their current situation, which is also a good thing. Okay. We asked people how they felt about advancement. So I'm going to jump and put all of this here to talk about them so I can explain. We asked what factors went into, they thought, your opportunities to be advanced in a role. Ability to do the job, first one, sponsorship from senior staff, length of time in an organization, your academic or professional certifications. All of these people were fairly confident, most people were confident who weighed in on it, that they would be things that were important. You see this orange line here? This is the respondents under 45 who weren't sure whether this went into it. This is a recurring theme in all of these questions, is the number of our younger staff who just don't know, according to their observatory, what it takes, what goes into these things. It's more of a communication question than anything. All these numbers are in the report, guys, which is available. So if you're not absorbing all of this at once, don't worry. People ask things like, though, does your gender matter? Does your race matter? And this is where these numbers of I don't know really became concerning to me, right? There were enough people that said they didn't think this was the case, but there were enough that said it did, or were not sure that these things went into it. So most people are sure that those things, sponsorship, ability to do the job, these things are relatively important. More men than women are sure that gender is not a factor. Minorities of color are the only group, ethnic group, with a higher proportion that think race is a factor. Those two things are tied. And employees under 45 are, for the most part, uncertain what their observatories take into account when they're considering advancement. And I think that's a really important takeaway. Okay, let's talk about organizational bias. We were asking questions like, are all skills equally valued? And now we go from strongly agree on the left-hand side to strongly disagree, and the white this time is the I'm not sure. Do people who work part-time or flexibly get the same opportunities for advancement? Again, the thing I've noticed here is the amount of people who are not sure if that's the case. Are women and men paid the same for the same work of equal value? 60% of people were not sure if this was true. We switched over to mentorship. How much mentoring is going on at Maunakea observatories? 67% of participants have had at least one mentor. Again, I flipped this around. That tells me that there's a third of staff who have not had any kind of mentoring in their role whatsoever. Nearly 60% of women have had mostly or only male mentors. Again, with that amount of management that is mostly gendered to male, that's not too surprising. 74% of men report their mentors were predominantly men as well. This comes back into it. There's some factors and studies which have talked about the challenges for women in management positions when none of the people who are working for them have ever had a woman manager or mentor of any kind. This was one of the specific things, one reasons we asked this question. 22% of women under 45 have had no mentors. 24% of men under 45 also had no mentoring whatsoever. And 13% of women under 45 report having mostly female mentors, and this is the number. 4% of men have had female mentors. This is definitely an area which is very fixable, very, very interesting, and worthwhile doing. Certainly something that we're looking into at the moment as well. Okay. Gender bias in careers. This is where the numbers get a little depressing. People were asked, do women have more, fewer, or the same opportunities as men? The pink is women have more, grey is they have the same, and blue is women is they have fewer. And I've broken this up here because the disparities between the different ethnic and age demographics were quite stark. Women over 45 and Asian women report most strongly that they have seen women as having fewer opportunities. Has gender ever played a role in missing a career opportunity? 40% of women at Maunakea Observatories in a STEM field report having missed a career opportunity because of their gender. And finally, do you think your gender will make it harder or easier going forward? 51% of women under 45 say yes, it will be harder for them in their future career because of their gender. I did like this very, very miserable 3% of guys who also think that their gender will make it difficult going forward. So yeah, definitely need support on both sides here. So we did ask about workplace treatment. Were people treated unfavorably at their current workplace because of their gender? 52% of women, over half of the women, say at least occasionally yes they are. This number really concerns me. Or if we witnessed it for others. And this time, nearly 60% of women and 44% of men say that they have witnessed gender mistreatment at their current workplace. And have they experienced it outside of your organization because of your gender? And this time we're up at a whopping 69% of women reporting gender-based mistreatment in their external workplace interaction. We did the same thing, but for a protected characteristic. Okay, so this could be race, sexual preference, religion. 45% of minorities, ethnic minorities at Maunakea Observatories report unfavorable treatment because of the protected characteristic. So we were not asking them to be specific about what that particular characteristic was. And or witnessing it from others, again, those numbers were pretty similar. Okay, so there's a lot of numbers there. I'm going to come back to some summaries of this in a little bit, and then, as I said, I really want to get into some discussion with you guys. We did ask people about equity and diversity initiatives. We asked what people had already been trained in, as of course it's a legal mandate, not too surprising that a lot of people have had sexual harassment prevention training. And then we're looking at some others: diversity and inclusion, unconscious bias, gender equality, or none. So these are the current sort of differences here. But what I really wanted to know is, what do people perhaps want training in? No one wants to be trained in sexual harassment prevention anymore, apparently, but this is the one I really take away. Okay? People are really interested in training in unconscious bias. And I think from my money's worth, this is the one which is really worth a good conversation about, because it's been shown to be really effective, done properly. We asked whether people thought diversity initiatives are a good thing. I was quite pleased to see that at least 3/4 of people do think that. But 50% of staff are not sure if their organization provides any such programs. 36% are absolutely sure that their organization does not. So communication here again comes back as one of the things. Now, I really like to see this saying 87% of the people in the survey believed that gender diversity was a top priority for them, but less than 50% believe it is a priority for their executive management at their observatory. 39% of women and 31% of men want their organization to do more to foster gender equity and diversity. And again, similar number believe that their organization is not doing enough to improve equity in recruitment and retention in particular. Okay, so key findings in the report were these. Do we have gender equity? Well, of course, the answer is no. We kind of knew that one. But it's nice, as I said, the main thing here was a baseline. We can't tell how much we've improved in 3 years unless we know where we started. That was one of the chief things we wanted to do here. So in STEM and senior roles, these numbers are lower than that 32%, 21% and 20% respectively, which is good because that means we know where we need to fix it. Is there bias in our workplaces? I think this is the one where honesty, 52% of women report unfavorable treatment in their workplace as a result of their gender, and 40% report missing career opportunities. And the one which, as I said, I really am concerned about is that more than half of our younger women believe that their future is going to be much more difficult because of their gender. Is there fairness? That means fairness in how people are advanced, given opportunities. And here, I think the takeaway is that staff aren't sure. 62% of women and 58% of men don't know if men and women are paid equally at their organisation. Half of the younger people are uncertain of the factors that determine advancement. And 75% of people agree equity programs are a good thing. So for me, these are the 4 things which really take away and go into the recommendations which came out of the survey. 1, recommendation number 1 is to establish internal tracking. Of course, now this comes down to general observatory level things, and you may be doing it already. Right? It's a very mixed bag. But tracking internal demographics establishes a baseline that a voluntary survey cannot fully achieve. And this should include gender, ethnic numbers, age numbers, and it should be at all stages of recruitment. How many people did you attract to your job ads? How many did you shortlist in all of these areas? Like how many went on, and et cetera, et cetera. These are really useful numbers to start looking at things a bit more carefully. Improved communication from executive management. So key findings in a range of areas established a large group of participants were unaware of executive policies on advancement, equity, and the priorities of their senior management. These things are easily fixable. Provide mentorships. It has been shown that mentorship improves capacity for advancement, improves retention, improves staff morale. All of these things are good reasons to do this. And as I brought up a little earlier, women role models are important for both young men and women staff. This really is something which is important. Enhanced training. We have a lot of participants who are interested in doing these sorts of trainings and would like to do this. So this is some of the things which we're taking on board. So I've raced through this because it's a lot of numbers and that's not really the conversation I kind of want to have. What I then want to just tell you about is the next steps we're doing at EAO, which might engender a little bit more conversation. So at EAO, we have revamped our codes of conduct. They were not clear enough, they didn't go far enough. I will actually say that Aura Code of Conduct was one of the ones we used as a template. I found it very good. But it was also clear that we didn't just need it for staff. Right? We have people up and down the mountain all the time. We have observers coming in. We have young students coming in that we're putting into a foreign environment. We needed to be able to also support them. So these codes of conduct now are also required to be signed by all of our visiting observers as well. These codes of conduct for our visitors include very clearly staff members who they can call if they have any interactions which they are uncomfortable with. And they get to meet at least one of those people before they go up the mountain in order to assure them that they have someone that they can talk to if they need to. Then we had to have the training for those contact staff members. How do you deal with a traumatized person? And how do you do that appropriately? So we're working on that. And then one of the big key ones from me, which is enhanced training for supervisors and managers on how to deal with the reporting properly. What are the appropriate ways to react? What are you going to say? And then you have to make exquisitely clear how are the procedures for resolving these reports. So those are all things at that back end which are really, really key and we're currently working on. So that's the protect part. Support. We're bringing in new, much family-friendlier policies. This is coming back to that question we had with that caring responsibilities issue and that lack of retention of women in that 35 to 45 age group. So we've now brought in a policy which has an additional 12 weeks of parental leave that you can take before you take the state and federal leave. This is gender neutral. It doesn't matter whether you're adopting a child or you're giving birth to one. It is equally applied to both parents. And also it is flexible in how you take it. And if both of you are at the same observatory, you can take it in series if you want. You can take it in any variety you like. You add this on top of the state leave and you can get up to 6 months each. We've also brought in caring leave. This is to care for a sick child, a sick parent that you don't have to take out of your sick leave or your vacation time. This is another one that we brought in. Okay, recruitment. I could give a whole talk on what we're doing wrong in recruitment, and this is one of the areas I'm focusing on the most. First thing we did was we have an equity statement now at EAO, but it's not at the bottom of a job ad. It's at the top. It is the second paragraph of every job ad now will have our equity statement in it. That tells a lot to female and minority candidates. When they see that there in that second line, that is actually a really big difference. We're overhauling how we're doing our job advertisement. There's a lot of gender bias in how job advertisements are read. Again, I could unpick this for you if you're really interested. It does make a difference. The other one is creating networks of minorities and women for these recruitments. Before you even go to the job ad, you should be chasing down, finding potential people to come in and apply for these positions. We set equity targets. Okay, so ours is going to be 2022. We want to achieve gender equity across all levels of EAO by 2022, and it's one that I'm hoping to encourage other Maunakea observatories to set for themselves as well. Interesting thing about targets, if you don't set one, you're less likely to get there. It's sort of an interesting thing. And also it's like, oh my goodness, we've set a target, how the hell do we do it? We do impossible things before breakfast in all sorts of different areas of science and instrumentation. I think we can figure this one out. So then enhancements, these are things we're working on next. Cross-field and gender balanced mentoring. And this is something where I would be also very interested because we may not have enough people of the right genders in the right fields, which across the observatories could be considered as well. I do think this is very important. Unconscious bias training for staff, for managers, and the other one, TAC members. So we worked very hard. This last 2 years, we have now got a gender balanced TAC. Some very, very interesting numbers. Some of you may know, right, which is we're still seeing bias in how time awards are going to astronomers based on their gender. There have been various different proposed solutions to this. Bias training for TAC members is one such initiative that I think will go some way to helping with this. And we need our inclusion practices more structured. This goes to how do you include someone whose English is not a first language, is something we're dealing with a lot of EAO who haven't worked or lived in a place like Hawaii before. And it's not, we can do it on an ad hoc basis at a small observatory. When you get to bigger ones, you kind of tend to get lost in the mix. You need to have some policies and plans in play for how you do this every time to make it consistent. So there's a lot of work out there on how these things can be done, and that's something which we're also looking into. So the survey report is on our EA Observatory page. You can just go and search for it there if you don't feel like noting this down. So all of the findings that I reported to you and all of the details ad nauseum, lots of numbers are in there, but you're very, very welcome to it. And this was enabled with the support of all of the Maunakea observatories and all of you who participated in this. So that is just a huge thank you. I really want to add because we couldn't have done it without you. So thank you. as I said, I rushed through it because I really want to chat with you guys. So I'm really interested in any questions you have, comments, concerns. We can go from there.
Yeah, I have a question. You showed that there's clearly, especially for women of childbearing ages and raising children, that's, you can sort of see that at least women feel that they're doing more caregiving roles that impacts their career. And one of the things you can see for Hawaii is that Wednesdays kids have half-day schools, right? And that as someone who grew up in the mainland, I had school regular time every day of the week, right? And so I can see here that difference of people having to rush out to get their kids, then figure out who's taking care of their kids and doing it. And so I was kind of surprised in sort of seeing your recommendations to not see something addressing that. Because to me, it sounds like that's part of that sort of caregiving thing that's especially particular to Hawaii. And so I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on, is there something like this role of observatories can do? Because that seems like it's impacting women wanting to stay at the observatory long term.
So I did the math. I believe that roughly on this road here, between a lot of us, we have about 200 to 250 kids. I think we could manage a creche, don't you? Between us, right? Not that many children all at once. Good God.
Yeah.
Right. When you're talking about kids in school age, right? When you're talking about what can you provide for staff and what can we afford when you throw a little money into the pot from everyone here, that's enough people with kids that supporting a after-school program for astronomers' children, right, is a reasonable. It starts becoming a reasonable endeavor. These are the sorts of things which I'm now considering as sort of the next layer of proposals. Flexible working hours, making sure that those are flexible. I'm really a big proponent of making men who are fathers feeling as comfortable with taking that time off as women feel the pressure to do. That's a real flip side that has not been talked about enough. I want the men who work at my observatory to feel as comfortable with their, child supporting activities as any woman that is there. I think that's about as key as well. So all of these things, yes, we should be looking at to enable men and women with kids to feel more comfortable about, their family responsibilities and how they balance that with their work.
I know you didn't want to break things down by observatory, but did you look at Hilo versus Waimea, which I assume the two?
I looked at all the things.
So are there particular challenges for us in Hilo versus?
I didn't drill down on whether those challenges were specific to. We also included, and I didn't mention this. We had people from Maui, and we also had Honolulu weighing in on this. We start to get down to serious small number statistics with a lot of those sorts of things. A real social scientist would probably be able to tease that out in some statistically significant way. I could only see numbers by the end of this whole thing. And so no, I have not done that. But this is where those internal tracking metrics, checking in at the observatory level, is important as sort of this cost comparison. I don't want to do it yet, but we do this again in a few years. Of course, I'd like to have made sure that we've made some progress in understanding those things a little bit better. Yeah,
I liked what you're at the end about care leave and some of these other sources of leave, because I found in my experience, because of I think the lack of Hawaiian and local people in management positions, that the concept of Hanai relationships was really not a thing, and so I had to take personal time out for those kinds of events that hopefully, with a little more local knowledge management, will be accepting of.
And I totally agree with you. I just don't think we should be putting labels on those sorts of things at an executive management level. You need to care for a family member. I'm not going to ask for a birth certificate. You have to care for family. You go care for family. Don't worry about this. The world is not going to end, right? On our end, we'll be okay. This is about that support for staff and all of these sort of areas, which we can do. We can manage this stuff. Yeah.
I forgot to ask my main question, which was more detail about how this is going to happen. You showed the 4 points of how your things you're doing at EAO. Do you think that what you're doing at EAO is feasible to be transferred to other observatories, or Because the sheer numbers, I mean, how do you determine what's a good target date based on the size of your organization?
I mean, that's observatory specific. And so next week, I'm going to come back and chat with Gemini management. I've done this now at Kekin and CFHT too. And that is definitely more of a conversation about, okay, here's the data. What are the tools? Now, you're not going to want to need or the same set of tools, but let's talk about the ones which could potentially be available and which ones are going to work best for you guys. It's also quid pro quo. You guys might be doing things that are great that I haven't thought of and I'd like to know about as well. It's a sort of back and forth conversation. But you're right, size of organization is going to matter, right, where all that direction of things is going from. So it should be tailored. There are a lot of things, though, in those recommendations that you can implement with a fair amount of ease. And the one I'm really pushing is, of course, the changes in the way we do job advertisements. Because plenty of people have come up to me at certain levels of observatories around the world that I've given these sorts of talks at and go, we put a job ad out, but no women applied. Well, what can you do? Right? And they walk away and say, sort of, that's all we've done about it. That's the real tipping point which we can change. And so for me, that's the one I'm very much interested in having a conversation about, because that's just words. Right? That's just words and how you write your advertisements.
And networking.
And the networking, right? And I said, I pointed out, when you have a really big role that you want to hire someone for, you always have a few people in your brain, right? Well, you should. You hopefully you should. And so for me, every time I'm at a workshop, a conference, and I see a likely young female scientist up there, and she does a great job, or she's an instrumentation person or engineer, I'll go up and give her my card and say, hey, by the way, if you're ever looking for a job, would you be interested if I know of a job that you'd be interested in? These are the sorts of things that I spend a bit of my time doing in order to create that network and hold on to them. And you really need to do that part of it as well.
So we just advertised one of the jobs. The other one is still in budgeting department. But do you have a resource so I can check the wording? Of
There's
this?
actually a gender bias app. I saw an app. It's an internet widget.
Okay.
You drop it in. This one's very basic. This will actually just tell you if you're using gendered words.
Gendered words.
And it will sort of give you a ranking on whether or not those words are gendered. But the key things which have been taken away from studies, which is if you put down 10 essential requirements in your job, a woman doesn't meet one of them, likelihood is she won't apply. The flip side is that if a man sees 2 out of 10 that he sort of fits, he will apply. That's how big that bias is, in how people approach these ads. So you can change that so these essential requirements are not written in that way. It doesn't mean you're not asking for all of these qualities still, but it's about reframing that into a phrasing which is less black and white. It does work.
I mean, that was discussed by the directorate at some point, where we discussed that the things we list as required really should be the ones that are required. If you're required to have a PhD, you're required to have a PhD. But past that, right?
Yeah, a lot of things could
A
be
lot of it is,
preferred. We list it in preferred.
Well, we did this in this recent one.
Yeah.
We took
But
a
I
whole
still-
long list. And
I know, but
applied.
I still want to check the wording just to make sure.
And I have a few really good examples of ones where they've reframed it into say we're looking for people with qualities that have done a range, and there's some examples of things in these areas. All right, so you're still hitting these things you're interested in, but a woman seeing that will go, I've done stuff like this, right? It actually is using more words in some cases. So that's one of the big ones. As I told you, one of the big ones is if they see an equity statement on the bottom of an ad, they completely disregard it. Doesn't matter how much you earnestly meant it when you typed it. Bringing that up into the bulk of the ad really changes people's concept of how you're considering this.
we did that too.
Perfect.
Or rather, well, we moved a statement into the first paragraph.
Yes, because the other it's extremely long.
No.
That just tells you how bad it is. All the things left to right.
So the essence part was moved up.
So another one. So I've been sort of I've been racing around the world talking to female engineers, like on all sorts of telecoms. I'm basically like, what do I have to do to get you here? And it's been a really interesting conversation to have. And so, you mentioned, all benefits and packages are competitive. So when they heard about our new family policies, they're like, if you put that in an ad, that would we'd pay attention. These are things we don't normally bother to put in there. But yeah, now we're going to list actually what our policies are regarding these things. For women who have a family and are looking at a job, especially we're on an island, right? It's so much harder to get people to have stumps with a family. And so pointing out the things we're trying to do in order to make this worth their while and that they'll be supported, and that's one of the big ones that I've had feedback on, which is really interesting. Any of these numbers that I showed concerning to people in particular, anything stand out? No one's surprised by any of these numbers?
There's a difference between surprise and concern, I think. I find it concerning that half of the survey participants are not aware of how advancement promotions are done. And I'm not saying that it's because we know exactly how it's done. I think it shows that we are not good at saying, okay, here's how we make these decisions. And therefore people can then, okay, if they understand how a decision is made, then they can say, okay, do I want to play with this? Right? Mm-hmm. If they don't, if it's just a black box, then you end up with half the people saying, I have no clue.
I'm not surprised by that number.
No, that's why I said I'm not
surprised. I'm not surprised by that one.
That's why I said there's a difference between surprise and concern. I'm not surprised by it, but it does concern me.
Yeah.
Because then if young people look at it and say, I want to advance and they have no clue what to do.
Yeah.
Then what?
That's right. Yeah. So these are the ones where I'm sure there's, as I said, we're not taking into account here by observatories, and I'm sure, there's observatories with better comms on some things than others. But I think as a general wake up, to management to say we can be talking about this stuff a bit more. And I think the other key there in combination is the mentoring. Right? If you're mentoring from a high level down, then there's a much higher likelihood that those sorts of things are communicated to your younger staff at a sooner point. Right?
So how do you actually get people to take up the offer of being mentored? We have tried, I don't know how many times, to put together a mentoring program here, and we have a list of mentors. We have not made it mandatory for people to be mentored, but people are not showing up in large amounts saying, yes, I want to be mentored.
I think that's one we could unpack at a later date, I think. Okay. It's an interesting one. I'd force it. I like
I would also say
I would force it too, but I get thrown it down every time.
I think there's a personality thing too. So I mean, when you get like it's like for new staff, when they get a catalog of senior people,
that's very daunting.
So nowadays I say, like, you have one person, this might not work out, it's okay, but I'm going to assign you one person for at least 1 year. You have this person.
So you're doing that now.
So but after the year, you don't have to keep that person. You might find someone else. It doesn't have to be even at the observatory, but we recommend. But I still can't force it beyond that, because it's a little bit more personal than just working together. It's not dating, but it's a little bit more
not dating.
It's a little bit more close relationship than just yeah. So
I agree with you. There's an organic part of it that's tricky to handle. But certainly for young staff, I think it's intimidating to be handed a list of senior people when you just turn up and go, hey, pick the one that's least scary. I think that's what I
Or also, I think is a lot of mentoring is horizontal. It's like, here's PsyOps, here's somebody in PsyOps. Great, they're horizontal to me. That doesn't give me any mentoring for how do I navigate the observatory world if I want to be Gemini director in 10 years, right? If that's for 20 years, right? That's my ultimate goal. Maybe the person who's the astronomer next to who has an office 2 doors down is not necessarily going to be able to be that mentor. Yeah. And it's not clear from the list there is that. So I think you need different types of mentors for different things.
Correct.
So the description, mentors understand how advancement decisions are made.
because otherwise they can't be very effective.
Right. Or worse, negatively useful, which I've also found to be a problem. And you're right, all of these things are true. And that's why I talked about cross-field as well as, and mentoring shouldn't, in my opinion, be directly below or directly above. You can jump all the way across. I think it'd be great, for a lot of executive management to be mentoring some of the, new incoming staff at a different level. And I think cross-pollination across observatories. It's like, hey, I've got this great new young instrument scientist who's really interested in optical and IR next, right? I don't have anyone in-house. So that would be where I might, come over to you guys and say, hey, would you be interested? That sort of thing is really, definitely should be on the table anyway. Yeah.
Can I ask about the equal pay thing? You kind of touched on it a little bit, presumably because so few people knew what the situation is. I mean, do you have any comments on it?
Well, I mean, it's difficult so there's only one way you can inform your staff that you are paying equitably, which is to look and make sure you're paying equitably and then tell them, right? And so the real question there is, our observatory is doing that. It was the first thing I went back and did. With a small observatory, it's quite tricky because you don't necessarily have a lot of people in the same role. But I was like, damn, before I do anything, I better go and check whether this is something I'm doing, right? It was really key. So the big thing there is, I think an observatory should be looking at these things. I think it should be on the minds when you're having a minority coming into a new position. These biases do come into play, and they come into play in a very back of the brain type of way. And so having this on the top of your mind by having this all reviewed, and then you tell staff, yeah, actually, you know what, we had to correct one or two things here or there. But now we're pretty confident this is going forward, what we're going to do. That is how you convince your staff that you're paying at an equal pay for
Should the
both
staff
genders.
know? Should the staff have access to this information? So that
Well,
they
it's
feel
simply
more-
about saying we did the check at the level which is allowed to, and I guess at some point it's going to come down to whether you trust your management are telling the truth. But yeah, it definitely is. That's an okay thing to be able to say to your staff.
What about the idea of radical transparency?
I'm all for it. I'm radical and I'm transparent. So there's neither of those things bother me personally. I mean, that's a bag of cats. For a whole bunch of reasons. So I don't know how much, to say about it other than that. I think, you're going to find a lot of, it brings out a lot of strong opinions, right? It's a conversation worth having. That's all I can really, I know that sounds a bit weak tea, but it's a conversation worth having because it really should be forced back at the levels which are making the decisions to say, what are you so worried about? Right? That I think is the question. And if there's things you're genuinely worried about for good reasons, then you should be saying those, and that's where the transparency comes in, which is also fair.
So some of these points came up in a discussion we had yesterday about career advancement, and specifically with respect to the upcoming National Centre for Optical and Infrared Astronomy,
right?
And how is it going to do that? And one of the things that's not transparent at Gemini, I think it's because of our rules, is that we don't publicise our pay ranges. Right? We don't put them in job ads, and we don't publicise them internally. And I believe that's a rule that is handed down to us. So I took an action to go away and find out and just demonstrate whether it was or not. But there may be constraints on
absolutely
radical transparency.
And as I said, some of them are very good reasons.
I agree. We shouldn't be worried about it.
Yeah.
I think that everything we pay everybody here is defensible because we do an annual process, and it's all above board. So, in principle, there shouldn't be any shocks, right?
Right.
You just say, right, here's what everyone's getting paid.
But I think pay is just one level of it. Right? When you talk about what goes into advancement, there are plenty of things which can be transparent and should be transparent. About here are the reasons why you didn't make the cut. This is about good communication, and about policy making. So, and you can be transparent about those. So I think pay is one, but expectations on, and this is good for managers, right? Because sometimes things do happen in a more ad hoc that way than you would like. Sorry, my boss is just causing disruptions here. Speaking of poor communication. So those ones, I think, are the ones that I'm of most interest with. Certainly the ones that I've had good chats with staff, and I'm like, do you not feel like it was clear what went on here? And that's had some course correction that I've needed, certainly on my end. And it wasn't ever, in most cases, about pay.
I was wondering about advancement. In this discussion yesterday, I mentioned that, the information the psychology information I got was that women tend to very shy away from sort of listing their accomplishments and highlighting them. Men tend to do that much more easily. And it seems like, so when people go, oh, well, we're going to look at, if you want advancement, we're going to look at the people that are saying that, right? That in my mind might mean that women may not think that they've had enough, want to sort of highlight their own, accomplishments to then say they want to be in management, right? For same reasons, like we're not sure that those things were worthy of being acknowledged, right? So I'm just wondering, is there, in terms of that senior management, then how do we do better about making that more equitable?
This is where these trainings come in, right? So the biggest thing here is the unconscious bias training, and I'm now actually doing my own course to get certified in the training itself. So that I'm not just all full of hot air up here. It's just so much of this to unpack, and there's some amazing tools in there. Learning about your natural, but one, bias is a good thing. Bias is what gets us through our day, and what's usually what makes people, good managers as well. It's not about whether bias is good or bad. It's about knowing and bringing them to the front of your brain. And so on a, day-to-day, everyday staff member level, it's good to talk about biases which are inherent to women and men. You start to bring out that conversation. In managers, it's about you have to manage your men and women differently. Right? One size doesn't fit all anyway, but there are specific things that you can do for women and men, and certainly, and it depends on whether you're a woman or a man in the management role too, right? So these are all things which are conversations worth having. And how you support and nurture and mentor women is different to how you do the same for men. So that's where all of that folds in my opinion, anyway. Yeah.
How cross-cultural are these basically anthropological descriptions of men and women's behavior in the Western world, primarily, which we were talking about astronomy mostly?
Well, I can give you 3 books just on intersectionality, right? Which is one thing I haven't covered here. So, and the dark wells of statistics that I fell into was intersectionality, right? Which is now add the biases of being a minority of color and a woman. These numbers are miserable, right? They have been shown to be that they pack on top of one another. And so there's been a lot of work done in these areas. And so there is definite work to be done there. And also, this is where I start being forward. I do not feel comfortable standing up here talking about the challenges of women, minorities of color, or, all those sorts of, that's not my place.
I was thinking more specifically to people within another culture, which may be outside the context of this discussion. Surely someone who comes from another culture or grows up in a minority culture in the U.S. is going to be subject to all of these prejudices and assumptions by the people of American culture. But I think I'm asking more, maybe like if, for example, I went to Europe with my American culture, am I going to see these same kinds of assumptions about men behaving this way, women behaving that way that we do see here in America?
There are definite cultural differences. You'd be surprised how many of the biases that are underneath them are the same. Right, so it might be more extreme in another culture, it might be less extreme in a culture. The tools for acknowledging an unconscious bias at the moment are showing to be fairly universal. Right, you might see different biases. Right, we're not talking here about a specific subset of those. We're talking about how do you look at them and acknowledge what they are, and that actually is pretty, runs pretty similarly as far as I can see.
Any last thoughts from anybody? Maybe someone who hasn't spoken up.
Was there any thought to respondents that self-identify as gender nonconforming?
Right, we made an actual specific decision in there to say, but this particular one, prefer not to say. And I was willing to take the criticism, which I did receive on making that decision for this particular one. It's a very important topic. I was concerned we were already addressing a lot of issues in the specific one here. And so one of the reasons for comment boxes in this was like, let's talk back on gender nonconformity and gender identity. And let's have that as a separate entire conversation because I think it's that important. So we didn't investigate it in this specific survey, but it is worth doing.
Right. Thanks very much for coming and sharing all these results.
Thank you. You can chat to me now.
Okay.